Hey there, welcome to our SaaS Academy live session. I'm your host, Nadeina, head of growth at SaaS Group. Here, look, we're buying wonderful SaaS businesses to take them to the next level. And during these, we chat with awesome experts to hopefully make your SaaS journey a little bit easier. So today with me are Dan from Code & Co, specializing in tech and product due diligence for global investors, and Daniel, our own head of product at SaaS Group, who helps us assess companies we buy during product due diligence. It's really good to see you guys here. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I guess let's just start with your background a little bit. Maybe give people who are listening just a bit of an into your story. Dan, want to go first?
Great to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Dan Bender. I'm a founding partner at Code & Co. Code & Co is an advisory firm, and for the past 8-9 years, we've been incredibly fortunate to advise many of the world's leading private equity, growth equity funds on tech and product due diligence. And before that, I was a director of product at Rocket in Berlin, built a number of companies from scratch. I've done some business stuff in the past. So did an executive MBA at Technical University Munich and UC Berkeley, and once at a startup too, which is where I actually met my co-founder, because we were begging for money from the same VC by chance, and we went different ways professionally, but then in 2016 met again and founded the company Code & Co, and we've been doing this ever since.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Daniel.
Sure. I'm Daniel, head of product at SaaS Group. I joined SaaS Group like 2.5 years ago, and I was tasked to build a central team of experts around product discovery, product analytics, and UX design, which to this date I lead and deploy that knowledge hopefully to all of our brands, and also invest time into due diligence. I've been in the past something like 15 to 20 years in product. I started out briefly as a software developer or freelancer, but quickly got into product management, some innovation management, some agile counseling in there as well. And shortly before joining SaaS Group, I've written a book on product strategy and bridging the gap from product vision to defining a roadmap and leading successful product teams. So that's a quick run through.
Perfect. Thank you so
Nice.
much. Like I said, it's great to see you here. And just a quick reminder, we are live, and you can definitely ask your questions, whatever is on your mind, and whatever it is you have to ask about tech and product due diligence. But for the initial idea of this session was to talk about product due diligence, because we had a couple of talks about tech due diligence previously, and we've covered it quite extensively. But when I reached out to Dan Bender, he said, hey, you know what? We don't look at product due diligence just as a product due diligence. We look at it cohesively with tech. So we decided that we're just going to bring both sides into this. So Dan, could you maybe walk us through, why this approach and why you think tech and product should be assessed cohesively?
Thank you. I think it's a really good question, because for us, it's very simple. We very much believe in assessing both, because we don't think it's helpful to assess, just product or just technology in isolation, because frankly, talented teams, they know how to write software, they know how to ship the right product, alleviates a pain point, and do so over time, over and over and over again, are the ones that win, right? So I think, that's what I love about our industry. It's very collaborative, and it's about ensuring that the right people with the right mindset, good operations, ruthless prioritization, but also very much tech chops, right? Collaborate to ensure they, build a product, solves a customer pain point. And that's why we believe we have to look at both. And actually 3 things. We look at product, art of knowing what not to build, right? Efficient resource allocation in the past, and do we believe they can do so in the future? Then technology, all the hard facts, architecture, infrastructure, scalability, and security, open source, the whole 9 yards. And then lastly, arguably the most important bit, people, right? It's like people write code, as I mentioned, and as such, want to understand what are the quality management practices. Are there any key person constraints? Like, who do you not want to lose, or maybe who's missing in an organization? How, and I'm sure Daniel's going to back me up here, who's done a lot of agile work, people over processes. Like, is the company able to identify a process that works for the team? And it's might be written in a book or might not be written in a book, but in the end, it needs to stand the test of time or test of customer feedback, I guess, right? So it's about the ability to ship code and ship product, hence both.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Daniel, what's the process for us? Like, how do we assess companies from the product size at saas Group?
Yeah, I do love that holistic approach as well. I think usually in terms of our due diligences, we tend to approach it from like separate angles. Like we look at tech, but we look at the product in a kind of a different setting, a different call. But it's absolutely right that it makes sense to view it holistically. And both of these functions kind of need to coexist in a great way. I would say for product or for development, it's a shit in, shit out process. So if you have a smooth running development machine, but you're not sure what to feed it, then you won't have a great product. If you have a great product vision, but you can't execute on that isn't any good either. And I would argue that you can see bad product management principles in the code because it leads to over-engineered stuff. It leads to big architectures and a lot of tech debt. On the other hand, you can see that a strong tech debt can also hinder your product development and then kind of gets in the way of moving out of that vicious circle into again working on big bets and getting real value to customers. So they're super interconnected.
100%. I mean, like what you said, I think is also rings very true. Like in the end, let's face it, I'm sure you guys do that too as investors, right? Investors care about three things exactly, and frankly, nothing else in a way, right? Revenue growth, so growth, hopefully revenue, profitability, or whatnot. Potentially cost reduction, enhance efficiency, right? This is important, especially for later stage investors like private equity funds, and lastly, risk mitigation, right? So ensuring that things run smoothly, right? And that, there are no cyber incidents or open source issues or terrible customer feedback, which can become a negative flywheel of sorts, right? So I think, and whether you, split it or not, I guess doesn't really matter as long as you identify such opportunities or risk factors.
Okay, thank you for the answers. So, what are the metrics and benchmarks that you use to assess the product's performance and reliability? Dan, want to go first again?
Sure, of course. I think first of all, there's no company is the same, right? So it really depends on company, sector, maturity, industry, also deployment. Like for example, if you're a desktop client or it's an on-prem software, data collection just might be limited from a technical perspective, right? So there might be just technical barriers to data collection. I think directionally what I want to say, if there's one or two metrics I would like to outline is probably customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value for obvious reasons, right? And because they're, factors that influence, first of all, growth opportunities, but also so commercial health of a company, but also, net revenue retention, land and expand opportunities, upselling, cross-selling, and these things are captured quite well in those two metrics. That being said, from a product perspective, I think obviously customer satisfaction metrics are powerful, like net promoter scores, CSAT, product adoption, whether that's Sean Ellis. Happy to elaborate, by the way, if any of the metrics are interesting. Or telemetry, of course, which is just, tracking data. What I love to see is the combination of both qualitative and quantitative data. But if I were to choose and I cannot, collect data quantitatively for maybe you're in a super security conscious industry or so, or on-prem deployments or whatnot, then I would always prefer to at least talk to customers, right? Because when humans talk, good things can happen and you understand what they need, maybe what they love or miss in your product. And this at scale is, I guess, industry perception, D2, presence in Gartner's Magic Quadrant, Forrester Wave, Trustpilot for B2C companies. There are obviously so many different ways of understanding what customers need. So it's at least difficult for me, maybe Daniel, you have a better answer, difficult for me to single out an individual data point, except for maybe the ones that identify customer health or commercial health. So I think it's very, very dependent on who you are or what you are as an organization.
I think that's spot on. I would say like not having access to the commercial aspects and to the general SaaS KPIs is a big red flag. And of course, in the end, out of those KPIs, we build our business case. But from a pure product perspective, I don't care that much about specific KPIs that or metrics or data points that we apply to all the brands, but I want to see them used in practice. So that's kind of the key component for me here. We do have a lot of companies seen in the due diligence process that have huge dashboards and track almost everything, but when we look into how they actually develop software, they simply don't use that data to make decisions or to even see if the last release has been a success or not. So I'm more concerned about, might even be very limited data, but if they use it effectively to make decisions, then that's a strong selling point. Whereas just having access to data or just tracking some data doesn't mean anything to me if it's not used.
Actually, 100% agree. Maybe story time. I once built a company at Rocket called EverJobs, which grew to be the largest or so jobs classifieds in Africa and South Asia and a couple other regions. And it was actually quite fun because this was 2013, 2014. And in Myanmar, which was our first country, internet was relatively new. And they had like 7% internet coverage or so in the country back then. We had the following situation. It's a classifieds business, right? So we go in as sort of Western educated organization. We're like, hey, we know what to build, like conversion optimized, perfect landing page. You have like a horizontal form where you enter the type of job, then where you're looking to work, and it was defaulted to Yangon, which is the capital, because practically back then it was pretty much the only place that had internet and also where we had boots on the ground, so we could actually talk to people. And there was a big happy orange primary call to action button with a little magnifying glass that said find jobs. And we get the first data reports, and it says we have about 40 pages per session or so. And we're like, man, we're awesome. We're like the best product people on the planet. Look, like people cannot leave the page. But then we understood that, rendering a page would take a couple of seconds. We're like, oh, people spend 20 minutes or 40 minutes or so browsing a stupid, set of catalog pages. That sounds terrible. And then what we actually learned was that the conversion optimized way of, in the end, is such a form as a filter, right? Like, was too new. It was a very Western way of looking at things because we're used to these things, and people in Myanmar were not, right? So everybody went to the website, and especially on mobile devices, and they saw this like little, this big button. It was almost full screen on the mobile device, right? And they clicked, well, yeah, I want a job, clicked on it, and then they had to go through like 40 pages or so of catalog entries to identify the one job they wanted to apply to, right? Which is terrible, right? That's like the metrics can be very misleading. And then what we did was the very opposite of optimizing for conversion. We actually disabled the button, made it gray, and when you landed on the website, there was like a big alert, a very big alert that said, hey, enter your job, like, driver or accountant or programmer or whatnot. And our metrics went terrible, right? Suddenly it was like 1 or 2 pages per session, but the conversions went up, right? So I think, adding to what Daniel said, so I very much agree. It's not about collecting data, it's about drawing the right conclusions from the data you have collected. And in some situations, it can be very, different to what you would expect. And so I think that's also what I love, by the way, about my job, right? It's like being able to be surprised because customers may behave very differently to what you would expect.
I love that. I would even go one step further in saying that sometimes it's more helpful to have an idea of what metric you want to track than actually being able to track that metric. Something that I'm seeing a lot when looking at North Star metrics, that you want to measure the moment, the aha moment, and the how good you capture the value of the product. And oftentimes that value kind of is only measured in the real world, and you might not be able to have access to that kind of data. And then a lot of brands fall back to something more generic like monthly active users. And I would say, well, sure, a proxy metric might be the right thing to track in the end, but to make better decisions, you still need to have that concept of what's the perfect North Star metric, what's the ideal representation of the metric that tracks that moment. And just having this mental model of what that moment would be and how to quantify it, even if you're not actually able to track that, is so powerful. And a lot of brands, a lot of companies get rid of that value by dumping it down into something they can actually put on a dashboard.
100%.
Awesome. And thank you for the story. It's a great story. Loved it. So I have another question for you because, it's one thing, just kind of hope to, well, dump the product on you guys and see what you can discover. But it's another thing to like come prepared and to actually know like how to maybe even help you in the process. So what kind of documentation and data do you expect to be prepared for the product due diligence process from the founder side?
I can start. So yeah, again, I would love to see if that company is actually having some documented stuff that they use in the real world. So sometimes you get these highly polished slide decks and roadmap definitions where you absolutely know that none of the team members have ever seen that. That's close to useless. But if you can come to the due diligence process with with your vision document, your strategy document, your roadmap, some user journey maps, trying to connect all of that, a record of what you released in the past year and why that came into the release in the first place and how you measured the success rate of that. If you have some kind of insight into your current discovery backlog and what kind of experiments you ran in the last 6 months and what you learned from that, that's the kind of thing that I want to see prepared by a company joining a due diligence process in the end. It's not some fancy consultant made slide deck, but the actual stuff that the team needs to work with on a daily basis.
I would very much agree. I mean, we love to see demos also, like love to actually experience the product and maybe do like mystery shopping if you can get access. Sometimes when we do, I don't know, an MES or CNC focus ERP or whatnot, so things that run somewhere in data in factories or close to machinery in factories, and obviously we cannot test drive it ourselves. We did something recently that had a high degree of autonomous driving, and obviously that's difficult to test yourself, sadly. But then a demo is nice and super fun. And then yeah, from a product perspective, I'd love to see roadmaps, and it's very important to understand a roadmap is a prioritization document. It's not a delivery doc, right? So it's not about I need to ship this by Q4 2024, but it's I know why I shipped this, right? So and the ability to not just have, as Daniel rightly said, having like a polished slide deck, but the ability to tell me why this is a top 3 initiative for you, right? It's like what data or what insights made you prioritize this, and then when you deliver it, I don't really care unless maybe it's a regulatory requirement and you must have it in place by at a specific point in time. Then I want to see evidence of smooth operations, whether that's time to value, onboarding process, customer support KPIs, customer feedback, because some data obviously is not available from the outside. That's the KPIs we discussed before. And then obviously there's a ton of technical documentation I'm looking for. Maybe not a ton, this sounds too overly dramatic, but a bunch. An architecture diagram with, to help me understand how's the system built, how can it be deployed, what tech stack does it use, API documentation, which can be like if you're B2D kind of a business in a way, so you have developers as customers or users, then you need to treat documentation as a product, right? So it's not just a boring piece of paper, but it's something that needs to, make good sandboxing environments for testing and playing with APIs, right? And needs to be up to date. So that's what I would love to see. Technical specifications if necessary, performance metrics, reliability reports, testing, like, test permit, automated testing, yeah, things like that. So they can be, really depends also on the type of company you look at. If you look at a 40-year-old, and that's a real business, a 40-year-old sawmill ERP that has been in the hands of a family for 1 or 2 generations, then obviously we expect a different piece of documentation that's available than if you're a modern, hyperscaler based SaaS product, right? So very consultant kind of answer. I'm sorry for that, but it depends.
But I love that you mentioned the demos, because I would also say that the product is the only thing that doesn't lie. Like every other document might be pimped up a bit for the acquisition and for the due diligence, but looking into the product and being that mystery shopper in there, you can see so many things that will tell you a lot about the organization behind, about how the team works, how they approach stuff, and if that's not in line with the documents that you see, then you have something to dig deeper into. So having a demo, and ideally something that you can experience yourself, obviously easier in a SaaS world, makes all the difference.
100%. Also, it's just fun. It's so cool to be in a room with people that are passionate about what they've built and excited to show you, right, what they've built. I think that's just such a privilege to be in these situations. I mean, the fact that a company talks to you or you get to talk to a company is because they have been successful at what they do, right? And if a company is in the same sort of virtual conference room as we are, who are mandated by our clients, it means they've done so much so well in the past over such a long period of time. And that's, to be appreciated. That's hard to achieve. And sort of the passion shines through not only in architecture diagrams, they're fun too, but, seeing an actual product and experiencing it is so fun. So we love it as if there's one thing I can pick, it's the demo and then probably the architecture diagram. Probably should be vice versa, I guess, technically, but the demos are so fun to watch.
You raised a great point with that these companies, they're successful in what they're doing, or they have done a lot of things right. And oftentimes we kind of have the idea of we're coming in there as the experts and trying to poke holes into the concept and find what's not working, which might lead a bit to some kind of hubris as well. So by first of all acknowledging that you're talking with people that really know their stuff and that have done an amazing job in bringing that company to that point, helps a lot for moving that process forward and seeing on an eye level. And it's not about looking down on a product and figuring out where it could be better and what's gone wrong and what bad decisions have been taken. Because as I always say, we all kind of are cooking with water, and they've done a tremendous job in making a great product out of that. So you need to be aware of that.
Right, 100%, 100%. I think it's 100%. I think we can be happy to be in a room with smarter people most of the time than we are, right? So it's cool to learn from them by learning about them, and that's what we aim to do. And it's quite fun.
That's a great approach. Well, that said, maybe there are like horror stories or like mistakes that you can share that founders made, and of course we don't name any names, but some stories that are worth kind of remembering. Any stories to share?
Sure. Again, really depends on the maturity of a company. So maybe very zoomed out, some general stuff. Let me think. I mean, first of all, I'm a product guy by heart, right? So it pains me to see companies that don't have this function, and older companies don't have that sometimes. And so if there's a gap in having this function, and sort of developers, do everything, or the hotline does everything, or we had this company where they spent like 10% of their time or so on actual roadmap objectives. The rest was sort of running behind the CEO, who was an amazing salesperson, but maybe had a bit of a disregard for the complexity of implementing such promises at times. That can be not great. Obviously, accumulation of tech debt from outdated architectures, that's not bad per se. Like in technology continues to evolve, right? A product is never done, and using Delphi in the past was an amazing way of developing cross-platform software. In a browser-based SaaS world, not so much, right? So, or fat clients, which means that unlike today's best practice of cleanly separating data persistence, database, business logic, backend, and user interface, which is the front end, into three separated items, the logic and UI, can be in very deeply entrenched and coupled. And if that's the case, then a cloud and SaaS strategy, even though it's possible, is going to be much more expensive and difficult to achieve. So akin to a rewrite, right? In some scenarios, on most scenarios. So very often I think it's a mindset thing. We've seen companies, there's a thing called the not invented here syndrome, especially older companies that don't use open source, which to people like us is always very surprising. So they don't trust anything they haven't shipped or built in-house, which obviously very much negatively impacts their cyber stance, ability to ship, innovation velocity, and things like that. Obviously, lack of trust due to cyber issues, compliance issues. We had this case relatively recently where a health tech organization, they didn't manage to implement a regulatory requirement in time, which was terrible, right? Because if you serve specific type of clients that need to follow this regulatory requirements, and everybody breaks this requirement because you don't ship it, I mean, that's terrible, right? So a lot of churn happened. And then from a pure product perspective, what I hate to see, but again, dependent on the type of company, lack of integration abilities, right? So no API or just very tightly coupled systems that can be extended, simply because in today's world we kind of live in this workflow economy where you know so much business value is given to you via an integration, right? Integrating Stripe takes like an hour or a couple of hours, right? And then you can suddenly accept payment, which is fantastic from a business value, right? And doing this yourself is close borderline impossible, right? So this is just an extreme example of how integrations power systems. And so when you have companies that are just very closed from both a mindset and or technology perspective, that's not great to find. Daniel, what do you think?
No, I absolutely agree with those. Luckily, I would say that I'm not exposed to a lot of horror stories during our due diligences. I think our origination team does a great job in filtering a lot of stuff out. I would say the one thing that I often see, that I would kind of see as a horror, is companies that live in this ivory tower and at one point stopped looking into the market themselves. So when, like, with 10 minutes of using Google, you can identify 5 relevant competitors, and they tell you in the first call that they're not even aware of them and they have never seen their product or know what they're doing, then that does tell a lot, both about the leadership in that company and the overall value of their product organization. So that would be like a huge red flag to me, and kind of one of the horror stories that luckily we see very, very rarely.
Yeah, I remember that during our past two tech due diligence webinars, we had a narrative that, well, pretty much nothing in the tech due diligence can throw an acquirer off or like break the deal. And I think a couple of months later, like almost immediately, we actually had a deal that went south because of huge technical issues. So maybe, yeah, like maybe the deal breakers, like what you guys just said, I feel like those are, yeah, those can be worked around. But what can actually throw an acquirer off and break the deal if you're looking for an exit?
I actually would say that in the money is free kind of days of 2019, 2020 so are gone. So acquirers were maybe the fastest, could have been the best, and these days are very much gone. So I think, which is great for our line of work, right? Because we get to ask more questions and engage in deeper analyses. So I think we do see awards. We hate to see them. We don't shy away from terminating deals if necessary, but we hate to see it because we want everybody to succeed. And the beauty of tech is almost everything can be mitigated in a way, because tech, in the worst cases, you rebuild it from scratch. But the thing is, an investor has an investment thesis, right? So they have an objective why they like the company, and it's important to see whether there's a match or a mismatch between what the company offers and what the fund wants to look at. We've audited ERPs that raised funds on the idea of multi-tenant cloud, SaaS, whatnot. And the reality was there were thousands of code forks, so like physical code copies with substantial source code customization. And of course, you can like bring this into this one shared main branch and make this all configurable, but it's going to be a multi-year, multiple in dollar effort, which means that potentially you might miss another train, such as AI or whatever hype topic exists. So deal breaker can be mismatch, or the biggest deal breaker is mismatch between what the fund or the investor wants to see and what the company can offer. And this can be to no fault of their own, right? But just, be a mismatch. Then obviously cyber incidents are not fun, because not only because there's data you can lose data, but also because there's a huge loss of reputation. If you're a cyber firm and you get hacked one too many times, that's not great, right? So that you'll lose customers. Legacy tech stack that would mandate costly rewrites are not fun. I mentioned not invented here, so mindset I think is one of the key issues potentially. From a product perspective, no idea of what you said, Daniel, right? No idea of what the market wants, what customers want. So no data collection, no telemetry, or no customer interviews or, no research in what the market is doing. What else? The lack of an actual roadmap, so the inability to prioritize and just miss next big thing, right? If you're in a room today, everybody has a Gen AI story. Very often is just a reskinned version of ChatGPT, which is fine. But I think at least they're doing something. And if you're saying, actually saw there's a popular iPad drawing app, and the CEO kind of has the strategy, which is interesting. And I might be very wrong in the future, but he has this kind of like grass-fed strategy of saying we will never do Gen AI because we want to support artists. So it's a strategic decision to go against, what was it called? Procreate, I think. And the CEO is very, very against Gen AI and says, and there are people talking about the rise of grass-fed software, which is just human-made in 100%. And so it can be a strategic decision, but can also be a mismatch with what an investor looks for potentially, right? So I could be very wrong. Maybe Procreate is the exception that can do these things, but I guess you know what I'm going for. Just try to be malleable, try to be open and show evidence of being able to ship in time, in budget, and in line with what your market needs.
Yeah, these deal breakers and acquisitions, I think, is always a very hard topic to to put a needle in. So I would say, yeah, there are some things like unethical businesses. So we turned down deals because we didn't like the market and thought it was a bit shady. There's obviously, like, if there's no group fit for us, like if you have a CNC shop floor ERP system, might be doing great and all the financial metrics look great, but it just doesn't fit for saas group. So it doesn't make sense for us to acquire, and we can't bring anything valuable to the table. It's not just pure money. We want to invest into these companies also in, like, our intellectual like impact we can have. So I think those are the biggest deal breakers. And then in terms of like the maturity and the quality of the product and the tech behind, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I would say at the both ends of the spectrum, if you have a product that's doing amazingly well, like best in class, I would say we rarely have those because those usually don't sell. They're just doing amazingly well. And then you have products where everything is wrong. Of course, you don't want to buy those, but that's not often the case. And in between, there's the spectrum where if we find a lot of things that we don't like, or if we think that could be better, that's also on the plus side, because now we have an investment hypothesis. We know, and we have an angle of improvement, but it will lead to a lower acquisition price. So at some point, when it becomes viable again for the buyer, it might not be viable anymore for the seller. So what I wouldn't call a bad product with bad practices a deal breaker, because I love working with those products and help them move forward again. But we need to bake that investment into the acquisition, which at some point make this deal unattractive to the seller. So I would say by that it becomes a deal breaker.
Have you ever
That's
aborted a deal because of key person risks or because of proprietary technologies such as home-baked programming languages or frameworks in use? Have you ever done that? Or
Not really. So we do factor those in. Well, I remember one deal where it was this key person factor, because everything, like the whole marketing, was basically sitting on the shoulder of this one person, where it was a personal brand pushing that product forward. Something, when that person drops out, we simply can't hold it up anymore. So yeah, we have turned down a deal for that reason.
interesting. We had this one situation, it was actually fun, where the company had built their own language and framework. And the tech workshop was actually a super fascinating history session where the CTO explained, started at the beginning of how computers were invented to today. And sort of the storyline was how the industry went wrong in some ways and why their framework and their programming language, which is known by like 9 people or so in the world, is the one to go with. So that was a key person risk we once identified, and that was interesting. So obviously it led to an abort, but the story was fun, and we learned so much. It was like a computer science history lesson that was actually fascinating to participate in. But not necessarily in the best interest of the seller. Actually, other things that we observe sometimes is that a company can also be too profitable, which is kind of like the other side of the coin of what you just said, Daniel, right? In a of where the buyer can only offer, so you factor in the risks you've identified, and it's not attractive for the seller anymore. I think the other side of the coin is also their companies sometimes they're just too profitable because the team is too small artificially, right? And especially in private equity, where you look at EBITDA as a lever for taking out leverage, so for financing the deal, it's important. And then for valuation, you look at not just ARR, but if it exists, but you also look at EBITDA multiples, and that can be too high if, for example, a team or processes or whatever are kept too artificially constrained. So that's not sustainable. So that can also be a deal breaker that sits between commercials, technology, and product.
Yeah,
All
true.
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. That one was really interesting. I have another question for you as how do you evaluate the quality and efficiency of the development processes? And again, how does this affect the valuation and what you see in the company during the acquisition? Den?
I think again, it's about are they able to ship and have they been able to do so for a certain period of time? So do we have comfort in the team's abilities to continue identifying market trends and building solutions that alleviate such opportunities or exploit such opportunities? So we look at, development time split, for example. So how much engineering time is spent on maintaining legacy system versus innovation, for example, or the example I gave before regarding the very salesy CEO, how much time can you actually do something that you want to build, or are you, which can be okay, right? So this is without judgment, but are you more of an agency that just builds client requests? That could work, but if you build it properly from a technology perspective, so ensure configuration or customization via configuration and whatnot. But that's something that can impact the tech, things. Then we look at product defect density. So how many bugs actually land in production and are experienced by companies. But then again, this could indicate that you need to shift left your testing a little bit more, right? So that you just need to test better or earlier in the process. And then we ask, what is your automated testing coverage and testing strategy? What quality gates do you have in place in terms of, CI/CD, in terms of, deployment frequency, stuff like that. And then, yeah, I'll pause here. I could go on for a long time, but I don't want to bore you guys.
Yeah. Sure, but I just have one follow-up question because you talked about shipping, and Daniel also feel free to jump in because I'm curious, like, is there any like playbook strategy that you actually like uh, development team or product team to follow? Like, I don't know, the base camp kind of strategy when they ship like every 6 weeks or whatnot, or like any other that you I mean, obviously you probably try to be unbiased and just see the good work they are doing, but yeah, are there any preferences, anything that maybe you would recommend to earlier stages founders?
Yeah, first of all, I think I'm super biased here.
I was going to say the same thing.
So yeah, for example, I'm a huge fan of the Basecamp approach. I really really like that. At the same time, similar to why I think that Scrum is failing for a lot of companies, I love to see companies apply these processes, these ideas with a sense of with some common sense, with a bit of notion of why this stuff actually should work, and not just read an article or buy a book and then apply this 100% to your own company, which usually leads to failure. So if you're an early stage company, then it's a lot about move fast, break stuff, learn things, prioritize learnings, and don't worry about the process so much. If you're a bit more mature, I'm a true believer that a good practices and a good process will continuously deliver good results. And it's not about having like one special thought, one genius idea that the founder had in the shower one day, but it's about being able to recreate that kind of success over and over and over again, which is a matter of of organizational maturity, of process maturity, and doing the right stuff again and again. And also a matter of like talent density and the people involved. So my first idea was to just say we stalk people on LinkedIn and see how their CV fits. But kidding aside, it is an issue that we usually don't have access to team members during a due diligence. So we have usually like the top leadership, if at all, sometimes just the founder, and need to take that word for granted. So we need to look into proxy things like the actual product, the release notes, the release cadence. So do we see that they released twice a week 3 years back with great stuff, and it got slower and slower and more infrequent and just smaller iterative stuff over time? That does tell us a lot about how they ship things, how they evaluate stuff. There's some things like ratios in terms of how many developers per PM, how many designers, how many QA personnel in there. So you get a feeling of what's most likely does it feel like to work in that environment, and how they're structured to get there. How much discovery work is done? Do they do discovery at all? And what's the balance between execution and discovery? Does it feel more like a feature factory? Are they iterating on stuff? I think something that you can see a lot is just by looking into the release notes, that they constantly put out new features, but you rarely see, okay, this is an update on that feature, and this is now an improvement on that feature. It's always a new feature. And regardless of how good your product discovery is, you will never get to the value a feature can have with the first iteration. You always need at least 2 to 3 iterations to get that thing to the value it could have. So that does tell a lot. And we need to evaluate products by looking at these proxy things. Dan, what's your take on this?
Not much there, to be honest. I mean, I think this is an excellent answer. I feel like momentum fades because it's exhausting and not sustainable, right? And we want to identify whether the company has been able to go beyond momentum, and I like the Basecamp methodology too, because they have like these like sprint cycles, development cycles, and then cooldown periods, which is also can be helpful to kind of spend time on refactoring, regroup, and understand what you've done, right, in order to identify where to go next, right? And so I think I'm not a huge fan of seeing full-time Scrum coaches in org charts, to be honest, because I feel like it's people over processes, right? There's for some teams, Scrum is great. For some other teams, Kanban is great. For others, Scrumban is the best. And whatever this all may mean, whichever process and ceremony you do want to adopt or not do. So we like teams that show they're capable of delivering, but also, don't burn out on the way, ideally. That's not sustainable. And don't just slavishly follow a methodology because some person attained a certificate, right? But if you deliver a product that customers like, are willing to pay for, if you grow, if there's not too many bugs that hit production, it's impossible to not have some bugs, right? And some tech that is also good because it's evidence you ship fast, right? It's okay to take shortcuts. Tech that is most of the time just a shortcut, and that you have quality gates in place, such as a degree of automated testing, and you're good, right? That's what you should focus on. You should not aim to over optimize. And as part of a well-functioning deployment automation strategy in terms of like DevOps, CI/CD, you can, if you're mature enough as an organization, you can do static code scans, and you can run your test suite, and you can do a check for open source compliance. So you can get all fancy, and it's great to see, but you also don't want to over optimize and take this fourth step before the first, basically. So the earlier you are, the more you want to ship, and then rather ask for forgiveness than ask for permission, right? Ship, and if it breaks, then it breaks. And the more customers you have, once you've attained product market fit and you want to scale, then you should have the quality processes in place to ship product that's largely, or not, maybe not the product's bug free, but the product experience, the user experience is somewhat enjoyable. And then you continue doing that, and then you sort of extend the level of control and quality gates as you grow without trying to be this. I think Daniel, you said ivory tower, right? We don't want to. I don't want to dunk on academia, but by no means, right? These are brilliant people, but in business, we don't want to sit in ivory tower and just shape code for the sake of code, right? We want to ship product and have people pay for it because we solve a problem they have, and whatever it takes, and most of the time taking a step-by-step approach is better than, for example, just following an agile methodology just because somebody says so, or doing nothing at all and going all on anarchy.
And I remember we had a podcast on pricing, and one of the things that popped up all the time is that um, like companies are afraid of raising prices and are surprised by how easy it was and how little backlash there was. I think the same applies to shipping things that are unfinished or that have a few bugs. Like a lot of product teams pride themselves of their quality assurance process and how they spend 4 weeks of every release and testing every edge case to have as little bugs as possible. I think from a deployment point of view, that doesn't make sense at all. But even from a mindset point, it's a weird thing. And I always say, well, we don't put people on the moon. So don't stress out about that too much. If it has a bug, fix it, roll back, do whatever you must do. But don't let that get in the way of innovation and moving forward. Of course, if you actually put people on the moon, or you do software for medical treatments and in the ER room, something like that, by all means, have that quality assurance. But if not, just be a bit kinder to yourself and just release stuff and see where it's going. And especially don't make your product manager basically a QA person that spends 80% of their time on just testing the same stuff over and over and over again, instead of creating value by figuring out what to actually do with the product.
Awesome.
100%.
Thank you. I cannot believe that, it's been almost an hour. I've been enjoying this immensely. And I thought going into this is going to be way too technical for me. But thank you for, making it very real and very approachable in a way. But because we only have like 7 minutes left, I don't want to hold you up for too long. Quick hack, the last question, quick hack that you guys use to go into the product, look at it, and kind of get that gut feeling if it's a yes or a no, and then maybe go from there. Dan, anything that helps you?
Mm. I mean, in technology, a couple of words such as which tech stack is used or so, or an architecture diagram will go a long way, because it's very easy for us then to say, hey, this cloud SaaS multi-tenancy strategy might be a bit more effort than what the IM, so the information memorandum, which is sort of like the bigger version of a pitch deck, tries to tell you. But I think something that actually often helps is actually looking at UX, because or UI for that matter, which is a function or a component of UX. It wants to be functionable. Is that a word? I don't know. You want to be able to use it, so it doesn't want to be fashionable. And we've seen so many companies where UX or UI feels terrible at first sight, but they're excellent products because something super dense and there's like tiny font sizes, and you need to, like, it can only work on like when you have super specific mouse cursors and whatnot. And the answer is not just like rebuilding the UI and make it like all airy and shadowy and like brand, make it all sexy, but it's understanding, is the company capable of solving a pain point? And you get that. I think Daniel said in the beginning, if in 5 minutes or 10 minutes of Googling, I find 5 competitors, that we do that too, right? So we look at a company, it's like, hey, what other companies exist in that space? And if, I don't know, you're an online video editor and everybody, like the top three people that companies I find online, everybody says collaborative workflows is super important. So it's on a landing page, one of the top, first things they see, and you don't have that, likely you're wrong, and these guys are not, right? So there might be some sort of technical debt or some sort of prioritization debt or organization debt or whatnot that let you miss that opportunity of embracing collaboration, which is how, for example, Figma dethroned Adobe in many startups, right? Because they didn't prioritize the fanciest tool brushes and features, but they said it's about workflows and collaboration in real time, And so I think looking at a product, trying to understand, does it solve anything? And you can do so by comparing, different companies. Looking at data we receive gives us a very big clue. Yeah, I think these are probably the things we look at initially. And I mean, it's the good thing about the internet is there's lots of information, right? So you can find customer feedback very, very quickly. And if feedback is terrible, then very likely there is some issue in the company or the product or the organization. So that's a quick one too. Daniel, please.
Yeah, that's a great point. Daniel?
Yeah, I would say the there are no real quick wins or hacks in there. It is a lot of deep dive, but I would say some kind of product sense helps a lot. And for me, it was always that I can't tell you how to improve a product immediately because that takes real investment of time and energy and understand the market, talk with users, and all of that. But I can usually tell you after 5 minutes what's wrong with your product. So I can tell you what doesn't work. So that's something after looking into hundreds of products, you kind of get a sense like your spider senses are tingling at some point, and so you get that feeling after a couple of minutes when doing the product demo, and then you spend the next 2 weeks of the product due diligence to figure out to get facts behind that sense and figure out why that was the case.
Okay, thanks for sharing those. Well, it's been great listening to you guys. I mean, just from the last couple of questions, I got a ton more ideas of what to ask you, and I think what could be still valuable to founders looking for exit or maybe for investment. But maybe we can do it again sometime. But for now, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
Thank you very much for having us.
It's been a pleasure, much appreciated.
Anytime, and take care.